the nexus of consciousness, spirituality, science, and AI and all of its other accoutrements allow us to have a very exciting moment. Being able to navigate all of this, as difficult and as scary as it may be, gives us a real sense of what's possible. I never thought in the work that I do that there's been a lot of unexpected things that have happened, and it's very exciting. I think that science and spirit are two sides of the same coin. We have an opportunity to discuss deeply and carefully and with love all of this that will help to define who we're going to be or who we're not going to be, because I think the stakes are that high.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Love Conquers Fear podcast. I'm so excited about today's episode. This has been a long time in the making, seemed inevitable ever since I started the podcast. First of all, I just want to say that I'm recording this slightly before South by Southwest starts. Really exciting thing happened yesterday. I've been wondering when this would actually happen. But I've talked about the Americans for Ibogaine initiative on the podcast and the fact that here at the house, we hosted Governor Rick Perry as well as Brian Hubbard for a dinner to raise money for the Americans for Ibogaine initiative. And that was a successful dinner. I learned a ton. I've talked about that dinner in the past. Really the fact that Ibogaine will de-age a brain, and we should have the scientific curiosity to understand why this incredibly powerful psychedelic can literally transform vets, where they over 80% of the time walk out of only one Ibogaine experience or session, and they don't have suicidal thoughts anymore or ideation. They don't decide to go forward with that, and their spouses look at them afterwards and say, "Oh my gosh, you're back. I was wondering if you were ever going to come back after all the PTSD they had." Same thing, it's over 80% of the time. Cure rate with alcoholics, opioid addicts. And I got a text yesterday from Aaron, who is the executive director of the Americans for Ibogaine initiative, and Brian Hubbard is coming on the podcast. And so you'll see that coming up in the next few episodes. And I just can't wait for that, because wow, what a force of nature. He is a man on a mission. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be a huge honor flowing with him and recording that. I've also mentioned that I finished recently A World Appears by Michael Pollan, a very deep dive into the nature of consciousness. And I talked about that on the last episode, so I'm going to keep this short, but it is a great book. It's another meandering tour, like Annika Harris, who wrote Lights On, into trying to decode the nature of consciousness. We're going to spend a lot of time on that on today's episode. And it is a very complex subject, because, one of the things that Michael Pollan talks about in his book is that as he's with all these scientists, they ultimately conclude, consciousness is the experience itself. I mean, there's nothing to the human experience without consciousness. And the one thing we know for sure is we're conscious, and we're self-aware. And to study that, given that it's the only thing we actually know to be true, is very hard, because it's not like you can step outside of being conscious and observe consciousness from a non-conscious point of view. So he ends up concluding at the end of that book, much like Annika Harris did in hers, that consciousness must be this fundamental property of the universe, which is ultimately what I believe. And I believe there's divinity in it too. I believe that consciousness is the fabric of God, and that it's deeply rooted in love. I believe it exists in the quantum realm. And he covers quite a bit of that in the book. And, one of the things I was surprised by is that a lot of these consciousness researchers, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised by this, but I was. They are talking about their psychedelic journeys too, as a way that they've grappled with the nature of consciousness. And for one in particular, his first journey, he was clinging on the entire time to the materialist paradigm. And then after his first journey, he had to conclude, like, hey, there's something very different going on here that science and his understanding of science couldn't explain to him. It's a great book, a really fun read. Michael Pollan tells it in a really beautiful way. Came out on February 24th, and it is read by him on Audible. So if you get it that way, it's really fun. So today I'm really excited to announce that Rabbi Neil Blumofe is on the podcast. How you doing?
Great to see you.
Yeah, it's so good to see you.
Thank you.
You don't know this yet, but I told you that I just got the PDF for the advanced review copy of Love Conquers Fear, which is my third book, and the subtitle Humanity, AI, and the Age of Abundance for All. And you're in the acknowledgments.
No, thank you.
So I just wanted you to know.
Appreciate it. Mazel tov on the accomplishment.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, it comes out in June, and there's a conference that occurs in Omaha. Would love to have you join if you can make it, which is called the ROI of Wine Conference. And the theme this year is Love Conquers Fear, Together We Rise.
Beautiful.
And surprise, surprise, it's the 7th conference that they're having, which is my divine number. Another beautiful synchronicity, but it's May 27th through 29th in Omaha. And I talked about it on episode 41 of the podcast with Jay Wilkinson, who is the founder of the Do More Good movement, and they're my publisher. So it feels really, really good it is truly a labor of love. It is also very much a labor. The editing process for any book, it's intense. You're just reading it over and over and over again to make sure to get it right. But I can't wait to send the PDF to you. It'll arrive in your inbox either later today or tomorrow.
Great.
I really, really look forward to getting your feedback on it.
Well, I appreciate it. And it's good to know that as you're laboring over something that's such a beautiful, urgent truth within yourself, to know that you're not alone.
Yes,
so
for sure.
may you continue to have like-minded folks who walk with you and support you as you continue to bring love out into the world.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I truly believe none of us are alone. There's divinity within us all. It's just whether or not we realize that. I talk about in the book, maybe a surprise to you, may not be, you've known me for a long time, that I view a lot of my life as having sleepwalked a bit, like not being aware of what the reality was and the divine messages that I was receiving, like feeling the presence of God and having that beautiful experience. One of them in particular was in Israel, in Degania, the first kibbutz, where I was just seeing an absolutely majestic, like partial rainbow in the sky. It was very unusual. It was like just a tiny little fraction of one as we're looking out over this completely lush valley that used to be pretty much desert type of land. They had transformed the land in 70 years. And, I got that feeling of energy all over my body. It was just a beautiful, beautiful feeling. And I was standing there with Gil, who lives there and was our tour guide, and Deborah. And I knew that I was there in the presence of God. And it was just incredible.
Well, those thunderbolt moments can really help define and reshift lives that either are sleepwalking or marred by injury or sadness or trauma. Yeah. So absolutely, to be able to hold on to an experience such as that, and to recognize the divine allows one to rededicate one's life appropriately, and to be able to share outside of oneself.
Well, you truly are one of my best friends, and I really, really appreciate how much you've been there with me in so many important moments, including, for the passing of my mom. Also, let me say the crossing over of my mom, because I do get messages from her and from my dad, sometimes in meditation, sometimes in psychedelic journeys, and it's really transcendent when it happens. It's incredibly beautiful, and so I know that their souls are here and probably right here, present with us right now. But when I look at the arc of your career, and I know a lot about you, but people listening to this probably don't know as much as I know. It's really cool that you're doing what you're doing today, but maybe we can just go back in time and start with the young Rabbi Neil, the one that didn't know they were going to be a rabbi. And, growing up, where did you grow up? Like, I know your story of your Bar Mitzvah, which is quite fun. You told that at the synagogue one time, and how you decided ultimately to do what you do today and do it with such grace and love.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Growing up in a suburb of Chicago, which was a really wonderful place to grow up and at a loving family, really was struck by trying to figure out a way of applying meaning to life and not, as you said, to sleepwalk through life, to really transform ordinary moments and make them holy. I didn't have that language back then, but I knew that I didn't want to waste time. I didn't want to just march in a holding pattern. And, we're buffeted about as kids because at least I didn't really know what was going on. So I'm old enough, I was handed a tape and a cassette and said, go listen to this and go learn your bar mitzvah. And I didn't really have a context of why. My family has a dynamic, there's a lot of religious folks who wouldn't travel on the Sabbath. So as a compromise, my family had my bar mitzvah on a Monday morning. It was Labor Day. And we had it at my home. And we put a tent out in the backyard. And it was fine. But I wasn't centered. I wasn't grounded in what was happening. And I led it in a dutiful way, as something I had learned. And because it was outside, and, we weren't in Chicago, but the Windy City adjacent.
It is the Windy City, yeah.
Windy City adjacent. We had a Torah, a scroll in an ark that was portable, that was built by friends of my father. And my father was in plumbing and distribution and great, so he knew a lot of cabinet makers. And long story short, is the ark fell over, the glass broke, and the Torah splayed out over the ground, which in the Jewish tradition is not a good thing at all.
Not a good thing at all.
And so the folks who sort of got over themselves to come to my bar mitzvah of the family, of the branch of the family that was less religious, it was maybe a sign from heaven of some sort. So we paused my bar mitzvah. I was a very impressionable, insecure 12 and 13-year-old. Everyone plotted about what to do, and ultimately there was a plan made, but it excluded the people who were actually in my life. The cousins were not constant in my life. My neighbors, my non-Jewish neighbors were. And my non-Jewish neighbors expressed that they wanted to help and expressed solidarity. And according to my knowledge and perception, they were rebuffed. And that really caused a negative feeling to come into who I was and what I was doing. And I felt very embarrassed. And I went and I was, didn't have the language for it. So I went and hid for a little while. I actually climbed under my bed and just was trying to process.
Trust me, I understand. I've had many moments really embarrassing moments growing up as a total, computer nerd here in Austin.
Sure. Well, I'm glad to
tell lots of stories.
I'm glad to have solidarity with you.
Right.
In a different way. I just thought that my friends were being wronged, and they said, how can we help? And from what I noticed, my relatives said, you're not part of this. This isn't your story. And I knew it was, because they cared about me in a way, on a daily way, that my relatives didn't. And it kind of drove me away from participating in Judaism for a very long time. Again, I was 12, don't tell anybody, but I had my bar mitzvah before I was 13.
Right.
So birthday's in the fall, but this was September.
Yeah.
And then really in my teen years, I don't know if I squandered it, but I certainly was in exile from trying to learn, because I thought it was a very judgmental experience, a very off-putting experience. And it wasn't until much later, 18, 19, 20, that on my own terms, I came to being able to wrestle with Judaism, spirituality, something bigger than myself, and be able to feel at home in that struggle, in that exploration. So it's so odd, ironic, that as a rabbi of a congregation, I'm viewed as one who helps people learn about Judaism. And sometimes I sit in my study and I just kind of say, really, me? Because younger me would be saying, I would not want to be in a office such as mine with anybody under any circumstances.
Right. Well, I can tell you that in your presence, sitting with you, I feel 100% comfortable with being transparent, and you bring that out in people. So it's, trust me, I've had many times in my life where I'm like, I can't believe I'm, running this company and doing this, but it is what I'm meant to do. And it's obvious to me that it's your soul song.
I think so. And having the cultivation of wonder and astonishment, even in ordinary moments, I think is the thing that has sustained me for so long. And I've been really doing this now for 28 years or so. It's a long time. And I feel very excited to get up in the morning and to be able to hold presence for people, to help listen, really, and perhaps guide, or at least help experience something bigger for what people are looking for.
And was there a certain moment where you were like, okay, I for sure am going to dive deep in Judaism? What was that moment like for you when you came back to it, that you decided, I really want to return to this?
There are actually two moments.
Yeah.
I had the great privilege right after the fall of communism to study in Poland. I was a political economy major and an English major, and it was the first time that the schools were open to Western students. And so I was able to study in Poznan at a place called Adam Mickiewicz University. And because I was studying, I had the flexibility to explore various places in Poland right after the fall of communism. And I was conversant enough back then in Polish, no longer, that I was able to make my way and kind of have rudimentary conversations. And I remember finding my way to, because I had this feeling of Judaism. I don't have any relatives from Poland, but I have relatives from Belarus, which is just next door. But I wanted to learn more about Judaism. I was curious and awakened to things, and made my way to Birkenau, Auschwitz, which is, there are two different camps. Birkenau was the death center. Auschwitz was the labor camp, and I made my way from Auschwitz to Birkenau. I researched because there was no industry, there was no tours at the time, and I got there very early in the morning and walked the route from Auschwitz to Birkenau, the route it was about a mile or so away. And for those who are listening or watching this wonderful podcast, in my synagogue, one of the Torah scrolls has a cover of railroad tracks that make their way into one singular track, and that design is based on my experiences in Poland. So we designed it because of that walk I made from one site, Auschwitz, to Birkenau. And in Birkenau, there was a barrack as well that had, at the time, pictures of Jewish life. It didn't have pictures of destruction or death, but pictures of life that I never really saw because, again, I was removed a bit from my own experiences, but pictures of men and women, of boys and girls, dancing, joyful, socializing, studying. And I remember being surrounded by these pictures from floor to ceiling saying, I'm so close to just disappearing, of not taking this seriously. I should give this a chance. And I remember something, I can still feel it, and my heart just dropped directly into my stomach and said, I am the one I've been waiting for. There's nobody who's going to mentor me. There's nobody who's going to sort of spoon feed me, and you've got to do it on your own.
Yeah.
And I remember standing directly in that place saying, I will do this. I will learn. Before I discard it, before I ignore it, I want to learn who I am. And that started the journey. The best way at that point for me to do so was through music, because as a musician, that's a language I understood much better than, Aramaic or Hebrew at the time. So over the years, I devoted myself to learning Judaism through the liturgical functions, the sacred calendar, the music of it, which is very deep and very beautiful and has everything to do with the thoughts about consciousness.
Yeah.
There's a quote from the Zohar, which is one of the mystical commentaries on the Torah, which says, there is a key for every issue. There's a key for every problem, but the key of music opens them all. And I've really affirmed that in a lot of ways. So that got me on the journey of taking my Judaism and myself much more seriously and to learn and be a beginner's mind, literally, and as things go with every day, just saying, I'm here to receive what I can receive. So that happened. That was in New Orleans. I was a student at Tulane at the time. And it was kind of an adjustment for the folks who knew me, including my girlfriend / now wife at the time. She's like, okay, let's see what this is.
Right.
And it continued and still continues in its own way. From there, if I can tell the second story briefly.
Please, yeah.
And, I had rooted myself in the confidence of being Jewish. I kind of knew what was going on. We came to Austin and served 7 years in my community as the chazan or the cantor, and had a sabbatical. And I like to travel quite a bit, and decided to take the Trans-Siberian Railway from Petersburg to Beijing, and stopped for a while in Mongolia. And after arriving in Ulaanbaatar, which is the capital, I spent about a week and a half with a nomadic family. And lots of stories there, but suffice it to say that the experience that I had with that family, blessing a woman who was very ill, helping gather water for her, and realizing the power what that blessing had in a way that I had not felt viscerally or somatically from anyone else. She was holding her hands. She was sort of shamanistic and sort of a form of Buddhism as well, combination. She was holding her hands, and I was gripping her hands, and she was shaking as I was chanting a blessing in Hebrew, a language she didn't know. But then everything changed, and she realized that we had a connection that was bigger than any language, that was soul to soul. And she realized what I was trying to do for her, and she accepted it and received it. And then the whole relationship between she and her husband and I just changed immediately. And they summoned me into their ger, which is a yurt. And they basically said through a translator, you're not a regular person who comes through here. Who are you? I said, well, I'm Jewish. And they said, what is that? I'm like, oh, it's King David. Who? Oh, it's Moses. Nope. I'm like, okay. Because they're trying to look it up in the dictionary. They're like, I said, Jesus, but earlier. They're like, oh, okay, we get that. We got that.
That's funny.
And then the very first question they asked, the first person they had said, when you pray, what do you wear? It was the very first question. Because it was so important to be able to share how one, with the authenticity of being, presents oneself before God to them. And we had a great, beautiful conversation. They invited me to stay. It's one of the regrets I have in life, but I had other things I had to do. They invited me to stay to learn how to be a shaman in their tradition. And I was like, oh man, if I didn't have this day job, I would have done that. But I had to get back. And I think about it all the time, of the respect that we had that transcended anything in common, of realizing that our, if you will, consciousness connected in such a deep and profound way.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. You know, one thing in my book, you know, you haven't read it yet, right? I talk a lot about how humanity needs to rediscover indigenous wisdom, and how much indigenous wisdom influenced people like Benjamin Franklin for our Constitution, our Declaration. That it's really deeply infused, and you were experiencing firsthand like a very different type of culture. And when you were giving that blessing to her, did you feel it too? Did you feel the shift as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. She was there receiving it, and I was like, oh, this is what a blessing is supposed to be. A blessing is supposed to shift the ordinariness of the world, or it's supposed to interrupt or disrupt the thing that you're asking for change. In this case, it was a blessing asking for healing. So she's ill, I'm holding her, and I'm saying, the blessing is saying, let's shift this energy. Let's find a different way, like you would with acupuncture or any other medicine. Let's get the flow of things in a different way. And she was gifting me that realization. I felt things in that, I could still again feel that in a way that I have not yet. Since people are very honored and appreciative of blessings that I offer, but in no way have I ever felt the magnetism or the vibration of her entire body that was due to her understanding in her way what that was meant to be. She didn't get any of the language, but she knew what it was for. And that act of kindness, that act of love, that act of aspiration shifted everything.
Yeah.
And it was in that moment, I'll just fill in that I said, well, I'm going to continue my journey learning about Judaism. I got the music stuff down, I've got the liturgy down, and now I'll just devote my entire life to being a rabbi and seeing what happens there. And that's when that happened. Yeah. In Mongolia, thanks to this woman that I don't know her name and she didn't know mine.
Wow. That's an incredible moment. And, you know, as I've seen your career unfold here, there's a few things I'd love to touch on, because to me, you know, you're defining to yourself more than anybody else can define you, for sure. But to me, they're defining in terms of my respect for you and how you walk in the world and how much love you bring into a situation and an environment. So one of them is the way you brought together some of Austin's best musicians to really honor, you know, people that have been legends in jazz. And as you know, our oldest daughter goes to Tulane as well as a junior there. But maybe we could just talk about that, because it's you know, when I describe you to people and I talk about how much respect I have for you, I also talk about the fact, well, also he's a very ostentatious rabbi, you know, because here he is also as a musician, you know, constantly jamming with the best jazz musicians I've ever seen on stage in Austin.
There's a tremendous value, obviously, in being in a community and helping to shape and transform that community within the community. But there's a real call, and I think this is something that you do in where love conquers fear, in a way of being open and brave enough to begin to connect partnerships in ways that may not be so obvious. And to be able to do that kind of work of repair in a different context, I think is very important. Perhaps beyond just standing face to face with the source or the divine, perhaps for me, the most sacred place of standing is on a stage or a bandstand with really talented people, not exactly sure what you're going to do next. And that kind of harrowing adventure, to me, is the language and the articulation of what jazz is. You have to be so skilled at what you do that you're able to release yourself, to let go of yourself, to not intellectualize it, to let whatever it is flow. And from there, the beautiful music, the ineffable partnership among talented people happens. So I've learned a tremendous amount on the bandstand that I try to bring to the rabbinic work that I do in the Jewish community as well. But the good news for me is that, you know, who am I? I'm not a jazz musician. I'm one who knows a lot about certain music and how to present certain music. But I think that the trust that the musicians, who I would agree with you are exceptional, have for me is that I honor them, I respect their tradition, and I respect the understanding that this is meant for everybody. So whether I'm the woman who doesn't understand the language or we're not talking past each other, we're dedicated to learning from each other and to sharing the best we can from each other in order to transform the world and to uplift a tradition that sounds good, but we may not know a lot about. And specifically living in Austin, Texas, living in America, I think jazz is not the only language, but is a major language of learning and understanding how to become and deepen our understanding of who we are in this land.
Let me just politely disagree with you that you are a jazz musician, because you know, there's different roles, right? It would be like me saying that even though I used to constantly program, that, you know, I didn't become this kind of maestro programmer. And that would be true, you know, although now I've got more superpowers than I've had before because of Claude Code and things like that. But, you know, you are a jazz musician because you have the ability to bring together that group and form them as a team for that night on stage. And it really is like magic to see, because it's incredible, like to see the subtle nods and, motions between them, as, jazz is improv, and it's incredible. You can feel the flow of it.
And I try to encourage them, to stretch them a little bit, and also to pay homage to the music and them artists who both wrote it and performed it.
Yeah.
So it's not just something that you're just listening to saying, that sounds nice.
Yeah.
There's an understanding that there's real feelings behind it, just like there would be when I'm singing, let's say, a chant that's an ancient chant in the Jewish tradition, where people are just not listening to it as they would, consume music, but it's actually maybe like an Ibogaine experience of coming and actually changing the chemistry and the hurts and the traumas and the difficulties in order to heal somebody from within.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do.
Well, music is healing. I mean, Ibogaine is a very extreme example of like where people have like
Some people would say
trauma.
jazz is too.
Right. Well, I hope not. I hope people don't go in and they're like, oh my gosh, Ibogaine is like I haven't done Ibogaine, but it's like a 24-hour, like mega intense journey where people are like confronted with all of this trauma they've had in their life and have to look at that and can't look away from it in the journey, and have to look at that from the soul view, objective view, the view of the soul where it doesn't have any materiality, it doesn't have any judgment about an experience, and allows them to see it for what it is from that view and then heal from it, right? That's the way I understand it works. It's like watching your whole life, as a movie, which it sounds like a near-death experience, where you get a life review. And
For sure.
Apparently, when people cross over, they have a full life review as they cross, and
I think a sacred experience should be an experience that doesn't frighten us, but is certainly so honest as you're describing.
Yeah, but for sure, music is a sacred experience. I was telling you earlier about seeing John Batiste on stage, which is a maestro of jazz musicians. It was here for an Austin City Limits music TV taping, and he was just manifesting so much love in the band and the audience. The couple that we were with was just telling us, oh my gosh, we love you guys. This is so amazing. And you could feel it. And it reminded me of when I was younger and I saw Bono and U2 on the original Joshua Tree tour. And it was like a communal, sacred, religious experience, seeing that, the way that they were manifesting that connection and love in the audience was just, it's transcendent.
I agree. And I think, balancing the material aspect or the consumer aspect, or the ways of leveraging, music and what it does for industry, getting to the root of transforming somebody from within, I think that is exactly the case. And when the vocabulary or the grammar of a sacred space or a church or a mosque or a synagogue can be held with difficulty for a lot of people. You're right, a concert venue is a place where all are welcome at a certain point and everyone is exposed to such an incredible experience. So I think you're right. I think there's tremendous parallels of what music and that kind of standing together, that kind of witness together can be. And if it's filled with awe, if it's filled with astonishment, that brings more possibilities of love and connection together, far beyond any specific religion or group.
Yeah, when I had Evan Alexander on for the 46th episode of the podcast, when he entered heaven in his experience in the coma that he was in, he remembers the beautiful transcendent music. And I told him in that moment, I said, well, I didn't tell him, I was asking him, wow, this probably is like more transcendent music than you've ever heard here. And he said, well, in some ways, yes. But he said, the great musicians are are getting downloads from source, from the divine. And, Rick Rubin's book, The Creative Act, goes into that in detail. And a lot of musicians have talked about the fact that it just comes to them, and they've got to like fiercely scribble it down. Because it seems like when those downloads come, Rick Rubin talks about this, you either act on it or it's going to go to someone else. But one way or another, it's going to come through in the divine. And we'll get into spirituality, but just to stick with, some other things that you're involved with, which I really makes me just have that much more respect for you. So you're involved in a lot of interfaith activities too, which is really cool. I see you as an amazing bridge builder in not just the Austin community, but through the fellowship you're in and just worldwide. That I'd love you to talk about that.
Sure. I think it's really important to know your neighbors, to respect your neighbors, and to know what motivates them, what animates them, and what frightens them. Because you can be a confident person within a very small group of people, but if you don't know how the world works, I think you can put yourself at tremendous risk. Mm-hmm. So one of the reasons I came to Austin as opposed to being able to lead a place in a more dense Jewish community like New York or Miami or Chicago, Los Angeles, is the opportunity to do these works, to represent as a rabbi in an interfaith space, whether it's, putting together a Thanksgiving service or reaching out across the spectrum of folks and just sort of showing up and being present and saying that we have what to teach each other. I think that's great. Or even in the music space, at the place where I do the musical events at the Cactus Cafe, which is put together by the University of Texas in Austin. That in itself is a, if you will, an interfaith event.
It is. Yeah.
And I think that being open to folks and recognizing that all of it is dysfunctional, recognizing that as a family there are disagreements and recognizing that there can be hazards and roadblocks, but persevering nonetheless, and knowing that the larger aspect of what's at stake, it could be a something you're fighting for, it could be a particular issue of the day, but knowing that you are caring for each other is really important. There's a parable taught of two guys sitting in a bar, let's say, and one of them at the beginning of the night says, "Hey man, hey bro, do you love me?" And he's like, "Dude, of course I love you." And then as the night progresses and they're at the bar and their bill, the tab keeps getting bigger.
I know where this is going.
Right. The other guy kind of with tears in his eyes and says, "Bro, do you love me?" And he's like, "Dude, I told you I loved you." He said, "Okay, well, do you know what causes me pain?" The guy's like, "No, man, come on. Like, don't get like that." And he started crying and he said, "If you don't know what causes me pain, how could you love me?" And while your story or that story may not be my story, it's really incumbent upon me to allow that space to be and not channel who you are through my expectations of you, but to rather withdraw or make space. In Hebrew, it's called tzimtzum, create a little bit of space, contracting, in order for you to fill my life, in order for me to be able to authentically care for you, show up for you, and know you. And that has been a real challenge in the last few years, where I might get calls of solidarity, let's say, after 10/7, after the attacks in Israel, these are folks I've known for many years, who, and it has happened, saying, "Look, we're really sorry about this experience and this difficulty that you're obviously feeling as a Jewish person, as a Jewish leader."
You're talking about Hamas attacking Israel.
Yeah, Hamas attacking Israel and the violence and the difficulty that has happened. We want you to come speak at our organization, at our church, and we want you to say these three things. We want you to say X and Y and Z. And I'm like, you know what? That's not exactly my story.
Right.
And I appreciate you calling, and let's have more of a conversation. They're like, "No, because this is how we view the conflict." And I'm like, well, then I can't do that.
Yeah.
And that kind of rupture
is complete lack of authenticity. Or they want to shape you into
you're
this
okay
vessel
as long as you agree with us.
Right.
And that has been troublesome, but it's just I like sports, just like basketball. You keep pivoting until you find the place where you can go and then take it from there. So it's not abandoning hope. It's just recalibrating to the point where you can meet somebody with a full heart and they can meet you with a full heart as well.
Right. Yeah. Well, I remember, in the wake of George Floyd and all that followed, that you were doing a lot of interfaith activities with the Black American community, and it was that time where you went to Selma to walk with them. I thought it was really, really amazing and beautiful.
A dear friend of mine who at the time was the associate pastor, now he's the pastor. So his name is Dr. Reverend Daryl Horton.
Daryl Horton,
Mount Zion Baptist Church. We were talking about ways to bring our communities together, and then realized we would get caught up on all the logistics of it, like where's the bus going to go? And so we kind of paused and laughed and said, why don't we take a trip together and see if that can model for others to do the same? So for 2 years, 1 year we went to places in the South to explore a connection between African American and Jewish experiences. Yes, and one of the places we visited was Selma, and it was a very powerful experience. And then the next year we went to the North, saying that these systemic issues are not limited to one region. So we went to New York and to Boston and to other places and really lived together for a number of days intensely, realizing that we do have a lot in common. And even though we may not know each other's experience intimately, we're open to learning.
I just have so much respect for you and in leaning in that way. And it's so important. I mean, huge part of, Love Conquers Fear, both this project, My Soul Song, is us realizing that we're 99.9% genetically identical across the world, and that we all have a lot more in common, both genetically and in every other way than we have as differences. But we're in this programmatic environment where we're constantly getting pushed dystopia from the media, dystopia from social media, and it's an algorithmic kind of hijacking of our amygdala to keep us locked in that state, because they're maximizing their revenue based on going after our base fears, which are really hardwired, because we've been around for 300,000 years in terms of, the Homo sapien race, which we're proudly a part of. And only 0.1% of the time have we had electricity in 300,000 years.
Wow.
So the scarcity we've dealt with, is very hardwired into our system. We have a mutual friend, Byron Reese. He was on the podcast talking about the path to utopia. And one of the funny things he says, he's got such a way with words. One of my favorite authors and another very, very close friend, he said, you realize that we're all derivative of the Homo sapiens, that when they saw the shape that looked like a bear, the optimists were like, oh, it's probably not a bear, and they were eaten. But the ones that said, that's probably a bear, and ran, he said, we kind of derive from those, from the ones that ran. And so we've got a tall order to be able to transcend that programming. And part of it is seeing each other, really seeing each other. Which is what you're all about.
Reality check is that knowing that we're all derived from the difficulties of Noah and his family after the flood, right? So exactly that. I think, Byron, that's a fantastic idea, that we're all survivors of this flood, and we have to make sense of the world that we live in, and knowing that life is so fleeting and so unpredictable and so difficult, pursuant to your point. It's courageous and almost superhuman to rise above those fears, as they are so deeply embedded in with who we are. And some, as you said, have such a financial incentive to continue to capitalize on it.
And as we're recording this, there's a war that we're engaged in with Israel, taking out some of the top leaders in Iran to help hopefully that regime to tip. And I was actually lobbying for this on Congress for the APAC Congressional Summit, which I proudly go to every year. I've been supporting it for probably 14 years or so now. And I want to emphasize that I'm an independent voter. And one of the cool things about that conference is you see how much unity there is. So this year they had a track where you could go the Democrat or Republican track, and it was almost a 50-50 perfect split again, which you and I've talked about before, which is incredible. Like, that it's a beautiful thing that it's that bipartisan in terms of the partnership that we have with Israel. But I saw that our mutual friend Human, who I was introduced to by Julie Maples, who really is preaching this message of unity, was with our other mutual friend Andy of the Hope Outdoor Gallery, was unveiling a mural. And of course, you were there speaking on it. So I'd love to talk about that and the origin of that, because that was the most recent, Rabbi Neil, just huge smile in my heart when I saw that.
Yeah, I think we can get gripped by the headlines and not progress any further. But people like Human, who I think are doing heroic work and really difficult work of getting beyond that, and again, recognizing and appreciating humanity and trying to recapture or reclaim that place of love, that place of generosity, and that place of hope, even in sometimes hopeless circumstances, is really important. So Human has been engaged in putting up murals highlighting Iranian women who have stood up to totalitarian regime. And he's had several in Israel and a few now in the United States. He called me several months ago. He was kind of a new friend out of the blue. Said, "I'm doing this thing. Help me get something together in Texas." And he ultimately got something in Houston, and then circled back to me. The dedication, the unveiling of the mural was on Sunday. Of course, Friday afternoon, he leaves a message, and I didn't get it till Saturday night because after the Sabbath,
for Shabbat, yeah.
I'm like, all right, man, I'm changing the schedule. I'll be there. And it was at the Hope Outdoor Gallery that Andy runs. Is beautiful. And I didn't know what to do. He said, invite everybody And I'm like, well, I don't really know what this is. So like I did with Reverend Horton, I will go and see what happens, and then we'll make it a thing. And the fact that it was so beautiful and so heartfelt and so important to draw, again, a human connection to the stories that we may be hearing or reacting to or being numbed by, this, whether it's drones or other kind of warfare that we don't recognize each other's humanity. The idea that Human and his vision and others help us to recognize that there are real people in these equations. And there's a beautiful Iranian or Persian community in Austin that now I've gotten to know a little bit. And now that we have these beautiful connections also.
That's awesome.
And the reason he thought it was important for me to be there also is because it was the proximity to Purim, which is an important festival that we just celebrated that takes place in Persia, which is ancient Iran, where one pushes back against edicts or decisions that cannot be transferred or taken away, but you have to find a way around them.
Right.
And the Persian story, the Iranian story, and the Purim story are all our story, and none of it has, as William Faulkner said, the past is not even past. It's all in the center. It's all in who we are and how we deal with the conflicts and the challenges and the hopes that we all have.
Yeah. I just want to emphasize that, people may hear love conquers fear. And I have a chapter, chapter 4 is on nuclear weapons and warfare. And they may think that it means like, hey, you never engage in war, et cetera. But the reality is, like, you really need to think about what you're fighting for. And there's been tens of thousands of people executed in Iran by this regime to try to continue to oppress women, oppress gay people, oppress people that want freedom like Iran used to have. And it was incredible. Like you see these old photos of women on the beaches, and they look free and, just being themselves. And it would be so hard to grapple with having been in that place and then the way that they're treated today in this regime. So it really and it really is a destabilizer for that whole region, and that whole region could really absolutely blossom, and many in that region are starting to lean in very heavily into AI, and that is the way that we're going to get to abundance for everybody, this technology acceleration. Technology has always been this accelerant for abundance. It's got lots of downsides, and because people can use technology for bad, starting with the discovery of fire. You could use it to cook food and, warm arcades, or use it for ill. And that's always been the case. But we're in this exponential curves, and we can't have a regime that is such a big exporter of terrorism and literally could have been on the precipice of creating a nuclear bomb, which that would really destabilize the whole world and that whole region if a regime like that was able to get that. And the people there are really, really suffering. They are in fear. They're not able to manifest love in a regime like that.
Right. And I think that's right. And as individuals consume or are gripped by fear, and that fear spreads to communities and metastasizes, the opportunity to have blessing or joy, or to use abundance, becomes much more grave and uncertain. And the ability that you have to help shift that, echoes the very real language of the book of Ecclesiastes, which says there is a time for everything under the sun.
Yeah.
And there's a time to recognize when you have the ability and means to be able to encourage a world where people can redo the conditioning that they've had, and to be able to share love and connection. And it has happened so many times in the interfaith work that I do, where you get to know somebody and like, wait a second, you're not exactly at all what I learned you were supposed to be.
Right.
And with that kind of uncovering, that kind of freedom, that kind of letting go, anything is bound to happen. So as long as you normalize or see somebody and don't cancel them, you have a chance always to make something better. And if you can get the out of the way that which precludes that, then the world becomes much more rich in possibility.
Yeah. Well, the world is much more rich in possibility in reality. Anthony Mello has this great, lesson in his book Awareness, and I just finished his book called Fearlessness too. Very, very short read. One of the lessons he has is that we lose that childlike mind. You talked about that a bit earlier, like the malleability of when you've started to rediscover Judaism, that you lose that childlike mind as your ego starts to develop as a child, and you start to label everything. And the magic and mystery, you can see both of us have children, and you can see the wonder in a child's eyes when they see, a beautiful tree just swaying, and then all of a sudden they're taught, oh, this is a tree, right? And that kind of flattens like all trees, because now they're just trees. But every tree is different. Even every cedar tree is different. Every oak tree is different. Like every single one has its own differences. And the same is true for humanity. So to like flatten humanity into all these taxonomies, you're a Republican, you're a Democrat, you're a man, you're a woman, you're this race, you're that race, you're this religion, that religion, etc. It's a notion that helps us kind of falsely navigate the world. Like someone would meet you, and if they don't know much about Judaism, they would be like, well, Rabbi Neil is representative of all rabbis in the world of Judaism. And that's just not true at all. There's a huge difference between, you as a rabbi as compared to all the other conservative rabbis. There's a big difference between Reform Judaism and Orthodox Judaism and Chabad, and all of these different forms. And any individual Chabad rabbi is going to be different from another Chabad rabbi, and on and on and on. And so, recognizing that individuality and the difference and the beautiful divinity within us all is so, so important for this time that we're in.
And if we can, as opposed to having the pressure of saying, you don't speak to my platform, you don't speak to my people, therefore, I can't have anything more to do with you.
Yeah.
So the opportunities that we have to overcome those binaries or those definitions, it's really interesting, not to get on a different tangent, but pursuant to what you're saying, there's an ineffable name of God in Judaism. It's a 4-letter name of God that I don't particularly pronounce. And, if you just said it in Hebrew, it would just be air. It would just be your breath. And there's a great, great study by a guy named Mark Sameth, who takes this post-gender construction, because we say he or, God and whatever God is, very gendered. However, if you read that 4-letter name of God in backwards, it can be pronounced, which I will pronounce, who he. Or he who, actually, which is she, he together. So it's an amalgam. It's actually more than, it's the abundance of who we are, as opposed to finding out, spot the differences, which is what young children learn very early on in order to distinguish and to be able to say. But if we recognize that everything is everything, and that within the concept of the divine are all of the constructions that we put on each other, then you can recognize that they have a purpose for sure, but we should not create a belief out of them and have religion only be the constructions themselves.
Okay, so I have to bring this up because Mark Gover was on episode 2. He's one of my best friends, and he's become a friend of yours as well. And when he first walked into this room, which we lived here for 11 years, we didn't put this wall in. It was already here. We didn't put this in. They were already there. But he walks in and he's like, oh, Kuan Yin. And Kuan Yin in Chinese spirituality is the representation of the unification of male and female, and God's helper, essentially, to help humanity ascend. And here we are with Love Conquers Fear.
For sure.
Right? Meant to be.
Well, it's great. It was just waiting for you.
Yeah.
So this idea that is embedded, whether in this representation or in the recognition that your breath is who he is, he, she, altogether, is just but one small example of how we're all one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's, of course, as you know, and hopefully your listeners and viewers will also know, that one of the most important foundational statements in Judaism is from Deuteronomy 6:4, which is the Shema Yisrael, which says, "Hear, O Israel, the source is one, our God is one."
Right. Yeah, the most famous Jewish prayer. One of the chapters in my book is on the objectification of women and the millennia of suffering we've had for that and how to transcend that. And, a lot of people are shocked to know that in America, women didn't even have the right to have a checking account until the late 70s. And of course, didn't have the right to vote until about 100 years ago. And there was an asterisk on that women of color, it was about 50 years after that. But one of the things that is kind of interesting, I think very interesting, scientifically, is the base state of humanity is actually female. Because when a baby is conceived and in the womb, their base state is female until later on. I think it's 8, might be 12 weeks, but I think it's 8 weeks. Testosterone floods if it's supposed to be the male, and that's when the testes drop, et cetera. But the base state of every baby is female.
That's incredible.
Yeah, isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, many people rebel against that, which we truly are. We don't want to actually see who we truly are, which is maybe Bay State female, maybe beautiful, maybe a sense of holiness. And these become very difficult for people to hold on to and embrace, especially, and there's so much pain that people receive in the world of being told they're not good enough, that they don't belong, and that crusts our soul to the point where we don't believe it even when we see it.
Yeah.
So to have this podcast, this book, this opportunity that all of us have to undo some of that thread by thread is really to me, the purpose of being alive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. That means a lot coming from you. I mean, I would say that out of all the reading I've done, from spirituality to consciousness to quantum physics to AI, if there's one message to distill it all, is if we lead from the heart and the heart conquers the head, then all will be fine. You know, that's in every spiritual tradition at the base state, is that we need to be the embodiment of love conquering fear, and then we can help other people do that work because we've done the work ourselves, and then humanity ascends, and you know, we create heaven on earth. We create abundance for everybody on the planet. And you know, if you're in whatever the tribe is, I mean, however you've taxonomized yourself, or people are, you know, creating labels for you, when you can feel in your heart that it's not right, it's not right. Like, trust the intuition. And that's, if you're othering, you know, if the kind of tribe you're in is othering and dehumanizing people, if it's oppressing women or whatever it's doing, you know, or calling the other side, you know, if it's political, like, you know, horrible names, and, you know, labeling everybody in that political side in a horrible way, you can feel it in the heart if you just listen. We all have that intuition. And so if you lead from the heart, it doesn't mean that there aren't things that you can disagree with, of course, like policies, different things like that. But to demonize each other in any kind of tribal context, you can feel how painful that is if you really listen to it.
And the damage that is done, not only to you, but to the generations that come as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're right. I think we have a tremendous responsibility to show up not only with authenticity, but with a real sense of not even projecting our pain, of expressing ourselves, but being receptive to holding and hopefully healing somebody else's pain.
So I'd like to talk about the meditation I had this morning and go into spirituality. So this book, Spiritual Diary and Appointment Calendar, are from the writings and lectures of Christopher Hills, and it was given to me by Neeraj Mehta, who is on episode 47 of the podcast, and is really like a brother to me. I mean, he's an amazing guy. He got me involved in Siddha Maha Yoga, which is effortless meditation, and it's led by, I say led, it's a person like you, deeply rooted in humility. It's this guru named Guruji, and he gives you this blessing, and it's all about, you know, having an effortless way to meditate. Like, once you get this blessing, I'd love to get you involved in it and get you the blessing if you'd like. At some point, I'm going to Bali later on this year. But it's this lineage that's been passed down lifetime to lifetime, and it's been going for thousands of years. And this was what I read this morning, and it's in this section on humility. This is arranged by date. It's one thing to talk about God as if he were something separate from you, a being that may be conceptualized as energy or cosmic force or cosmic intelligence, or some old man with a beard somewhere. Just as an aside, I had Jonathan Greenblatt on the podcast, the CEO of the ADL, for episode 49, and he specifically invoked that his belief is like God is not like some old man with a beard somewhere. So it's funny to read this. It made me it made me chuckle when I read it this morning. But God is so far beyond anything that humans can think about or even imagine, that all we can say, if we're honest, is that we don't know what God is. The thing I'm talking about is humiliating, humbling, and unless you realize your total ignorance of it, you can't even begin to know it. So this is what I read right before I went into my meditation. And, you know, as you kind of grapple with, and one of the things that I love about Judaism is, as Jews, we are completely humble in the presence of God. And we don't assume to know the nature of God, that it's so far beyond our comprehension. It really synchronizes with this. And that God is ineffable, is nameless, as you just covered, is formless. And I'm just curious, like, how you think about, because you're so studied on Judaism and interfaith, you know, you've got an exposure to a lot of other spiritual traditions. How do you think about the nature of this reality that ultimately we're in?
It's a great question. And again, I can only provide a sense of, shadow of learning. But, what really is, as you've just read, is far beyond any comprehension that I have. Mm-hmm. There's a really interesting contrast between, let's say, and I'll just evoke the season 1 of the Bible, if you don't mind, like the Hebrew Bible. If you don't.
Sounds like a Netflix special.
So if you haven't seen it, it's, it's in the second section. But the prophetic experience that Isaiah has in Isaiah 6, where he ascends to heaven, he ascends to this divine place. And it's funny, we talked earlier about the divine song, right? He is in a place where the angels are basically screaming, holy, holy, holy. And it's so loud for him. Mm-hmm. And he recognizes, based on that and other things, that he's in a very important place. But those are the angels. Mm-hmm. In other places, also in the section of the prophets, you have Elijah the prophet, who's this incredible explorer who is trying to figure out the divine presence, trying to find that channel, and recognizes that God is not in that bombast. Mm-hmm. God is not in the loudness, but rather God is in the still small voice, or in the still thin voice. And so if we can get out of our own way, and not only allow others to fill our space, but if we can get out of our own way and feel that our surety is an illusion, then in that sense of awe, in that sense of astonishment, we can begin to connect to that which is the thin voice, that which is the narrow bridge, and that which sustains us not only in the beautiful, precious, yet fleeting life that we have, where I am I and you are you, but in the scope of all that has been, as God says to Moses at the burning bush, Eheyeh asher eheyeh, which can be translated as I will be what I will be, but it also can be translated as I am that which I always have been. Mm-hmm. And that to me is really the divine sense. If we begin to put boundaries on it or labels to it, as we just discussed, I think it becomes much more paltry. Mm-hmm. But if we can allow ourselves to feel part of that oceanic presence of what God is, then we're on a better track, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so much wisdom in that, and all the spiritual traditions are around if you quiet the mind, then that's the way to ultimately connect with source. Mm-hmm. And, that's the way that psychedelics work too, is, kind of quieting and shutting down the default mode network. That's the way it happened for Eben Alexander in his transcendent, near-death experience. Now I don't know if you know this, that I've had 12 friends open up to me at this point about their near-death experiences.
Wow.
12. Prior to 2025, 0. Which is interesting. I mean, some of these people have been friends for 10 to 20 years.
Well, it's hard to talk about, I would imagine. And if you set a landscape of
Yeah.
giving people permission to actually be who they are, then it's astonishing to feel and hear what people are really dealing with.
Yeah, but it's amazing. I mean, you know, Brian Marescu, who wrote the book The Immortality Key, the first time he's ever talked about on a podcast about his near-death experience was on Love Conquers Fear. That was on episode 48.
Why do you believe it is that people are reticent to talk about it?
Because this is I'm going to try to keep this short. And I sigh because this touches on so many things that we've just talked about. So it's the simple version is that this dogmatic separation, this labeling of things, this dogmatic separation of science and spirituality, of like you're either in this swim lane or that swim lane, or you're either, again, you know, this type of person or that type of person, or this race or that race, or whatever the label is a big part of the suffering that we have to overcome collectively as humanity. And it's fear of cancellation. It's fear of talking about spirituality and, you know, having that, you know, atheist be like, another person talking about God. Whereas the atheist like has a very strong belief system as well. Like, you know, to hold on like so tightly to, no, there is no God, like there must be no God. And, you know, J.D. Messenger covers it so well in 11 Days in May, that the existence of the atheist is for the exploration of God. Like without any atheist, there wouldn't be as much of this pull to explore. That is part of the duality that exists to force the exploration and the discussion, right? So to cling on like so strongly to a position and attach like deep dogma to it is why you know, they undoubtedly had opened up at some point in their life, and friends started to look at them differently. And it's funny because, you know, a lot of friends have, not a lot, but a few have been worried about me in terms of how open I've been on this podcast and how open I'm being in the book. You know, I've told them, you know, what's in the book. And for me, it's just walking that authentic path, and it's really doing my best to be the embodiment of love, conquering fear, and being rooted in that, and trusting in that. You know, the way I would describe that is it's walking in God's grace. It's walking with the Tao, if you want to invoke the Tao Te Ching, and when that happens, you know, the divine shows up, and it shows up in interesting ways. I mean, you know, you were recorded in this room for an award that I'm about to receive, which is super humbling and completely unexpected. You know, next week I'll be at Tulane University, and I'm not a Tulane grad, although our daughter is there, receiving this Entrepreneur of the Year award from President Fitz, who's become a good friend. I didn't know President Fitz. I didn't know anybody at Tulane prior to. I knew some people that graduated from Tulane, but you know, Rachel, she wouldn't let me ask a single person to write a recommendation letter for her. She wanted to get it just 100% on her own merits. She's got her dream internship in New York City for the summer, 100% on her own merits. Wouldn't even tell us the company that she was interviewing with, didn't want any help, which I respect. And the reason I bring that up is that when I made this decision to be this transparent, and it's a very conscious decision, I had to overcome the layers of fear that go along with that type of decision. The attachment to awards I've gotten in the past, or the attachment to capitalistic outcomes I've had in the past, and be like, really, is that is that what I'm going to allow define me, or is what really defines me the way I walk in the world and the love that I do my best to embody, and my soul song, which is ultimately what I'm doing now. And so I went through this process mentally of just like, it's okay. If that's like the end of awards, fine. That didn't define me in the first place. So to see this award manifest, and specifically manifest in the letter that President Fitz passed to me to see if I would accept this award, where they were raving about how much they love conquers fear and the message that it has for humanity. And I had this very explicit conversation with them where I said, hey, I just want to make sure, because it's totally fine if you guys don't want to give me this award. I wasn't expecting anything. I didn't even know this. It was really a shock to me, honestly. And I said, you know how authentic I'm being on the podcast and in my book? And they said, yes. And I said, okay, I just want to make sure, because, that does make some people like fearful of cancellation or whatever else. And they said, no, Tulane's all about authenticity, and New Orleans is all about authenticity. So I just thought it was so cool. And the reason I mention it is for anybody that is out there listening to this or watching this and thinking about how to walk in the world, and whether or not to walk with authenticity, whether it's their transcendent near-death experience that they want to talk about one-on-one with friends, or go public with, however they want to do it, or their feeling of like, hey, I'm in this tribe of this political party or whatever it is, or this race or this religion, and I feel like there's this part that's not led from the heart, and I really feel like I want to talk about that, and I want to be honest about that instead of just kind of be silent about it. They could be a big part of the change that we need in the world,
For sure.
and so, I do think that this container that I've started with Love Conquers Fear is getting other people to open up a little bit more. And I've had many people that have helped encourage me in their own way, even though they didn't necessarily know it. I mean, I've told John Mackey that he encouraged me, but it wasn't like he wrote this to encourage me. He wasn't explicitly thinking about it. But when he wrote his book, The Whole Story, his tell-all of whole foods, chapter 1 is on his transcendent psychedelic journey that got him to realize that we're all connected and everything's rooted in love. And that got him over the fear after he dropped out of UT Austin to launch Whole Foods. And, we talked about that on episode 30 of the podcast, but, it's out there for everybody to read.
Well, many of us live lives of quiet desperation, and to be able to tune into and be inspired by a podcast, a person who models something very different, allows us to hopefully have the courage to do the same.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. And, this is a bit like the Ghostbusters, which came out in 1984, interesting year for that, where it's like crossing all the streams. And it's doing that because the nature of our reality has never mattered more than it does.
And it's
right
been
now.
so unpredictable at this point, because we don't know what is real and what isn't real anymore.
I think that's assuming that we ever knew what was real.
Sure, but if seeing is believing is a cliche, and then you get on social media or something else and you don't know whether that's a legitimate video.
That's true. That is definitely true. Yeah, there's a huge problem emerging powered by AI. And it's a very solvable problem, but it's one where the social media companies and the AI companies need to actively want to solve it, as opposed to just fall into I want more and more clicks and more and more downloads and more and more usage.
And at least in Judaism, that awareness or that astonishment of the divine, or knowing that we are in reverence to something bigger than ourselves, will help dictate whether or not that can be the case.
Yeah. Do you agree with that there's a consciousness awakening underway?
Oh, 100%.
Do you feel that? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that, I think that is the divine waking us up.
I hope so. I think that's right. I think that whether it's a newly rediscovered, I should say, interest in meditation by some that's 40 years old or more, whether it's a renewed interest in psychedelics or any other tool that will get us to appreciate our consciousness, I think that awakening is something that I think we need to desperately pay attention to and allow us to be unafraid to see where that will lead us, because it will be much beyond the life that we think we are as an individual. That's for sure.
Well, I think it's happening for a reason. I think everything is happening for a reason. And there's all these synchronicities and all of these nudges you get from the divine, whether you're sleepwalking or not, whether you're conscious of them happening or not. And if you viewed it non-spiritually, which I view it as both spiritually and scientifically, I think two things can be true at the same time.
Agreed.
The non-spiritual way to look at it would be that there's something about natural selection and about the connectedness that we have through whatever it is, quantum physics, et cetera, through the field discovered in Higgs boson, that is waking us up so we don't extinct ourselves. That would be another way to view it. But the reason that I choose the spiritual path as the way to navigate this is that it is the way to ultimately walk the path to allow love to conquer your fear and be a bit like Neo in the Matrix and stop the bullets. And you can get there through Stoicism as well. So it's not just through, it's not just through a belief in God or a belief in spirituality. There are many spiritual practices to get there, but the fact that it's happening at this moment, at this penultimate moment for humanity, I think is not a mistake.
And whether it's again a warning or a recognition that we have crossed a lot of rivers and we need to take stock of where we are, or whether it's just the next thing in our development. You're right. And I think all of the nexus of consciousness, spirituality, science, and AI and all of its other accoutrements allow us to have a very exciting moment. I mean, I think being able to navigate all of this, as difficult and as scary as it may be, not fearful, gives us a real sense of what's possible. And I never thought in the work that I do that, there's been a lot of unexpected things that have happened and how to react to things, but it's very exciting. And I'm not a scientist, but I think you're right. I think that science and spirit are two sides of the same coin. And we have an opportunity to discuss deeply and carefully and with love all of this that will help to define who we're going to be or who we're not going to be, because I think the stakes are that high.
Right.
I think your point about extinction is real. And, we don't have to be anything other than just paying attention to see how our environment has changed.
Right. By the way, I have a very practical tip for people on how to know whether or not what you're seeing is real. And because I see this happen with a number of friends where they'll share like this major scientific breakthrough just happened or whatever it is, whatever the piece of news is. Believe it or not, the easiest way to do that, because we're in this time where all of humanity's content is in one system that you can speak to in any language, whether it's native language content in Hebrew and Japanese, you name it, Korean, and you want to speak to it in English, that now is possible. So a very simple technique that I do whenever I see a scientific breakthrough story that a friend is posting, or some other story that just sounds really improbable, is I'll just copy that and I'll paste it into either ChatGPT or Claude. You could also do it in Gemini. And I'll use the thinking mode to have it do research on whether or not that's true. And more often than not, it has a kernel of truth that then they diverged into this big, macro change that actually hasn't happened. So anybody listening to this, I would encourage them to do that before they share something, to know. And what I do is, because I don't have this troll aspect of me at all in my persona, is I'll privately either call or message them, and I'll say, hey, just so you know, I did this research and that's not actually scientifically accurate. And so just be aware of that. I had a friend recently send me this amazing one on this amazing story on Bruce Lee taking on this it was like this Navy SEAL lieutenant, and he was like the embodiment of toughness and built of nails and all of this stuff. And it was a great story. It was very Tao Te Ching. It was a great story, which could be true about Bruce Lee and what I know about Bruce Lee. And it was a very artful YouTube video, and the lesson was a good lesson. So the lesson was solid, but the story itself was fabricated. But the lesson was great. So you could still take away the lesson. Sure. It was a fable essentially, but it was told in a way that it was this true story. And he reacted when I messaged him privately. He said, "Oh no, it was had." And I said, "No." I said, "Yes, there was this aspect where it was false in terms of the story itself, but the fable is very Tao Te Ching, and there's been many people throughout history where that's been true of." Where it created a shift. And essentially Bruce Lee, humbled the guy in a very polite way, so that he would have a shift in his life, and it would transform him. And there's lots of stories of that.
Sure. But it sounds like that's what you did with your friend too. Yeah. It was a subtle shift of, now I'll pay more attention to what I choose to share.
Yeah, but I was trying to tell him, hey, the fable itself, there's a lot of truth in the fable. Sure. Don't worry so much that this part wasn't true. But anyways, it's just a very simple tip for people. So as you've kind of navigated your understanding of reality, how has that evolved for you over time?
I have a tremendous respect for complexity.
Yeah.
I have a tremendous respect when people are being authentic and honest, that, as you said, more than one thing can be true at a time, and the recognition that everything is not either or, that everything is both and that people are struggling with their own sense and conception of self-worth, but they're also struggling with things that have happened in their lives or things that have happened in their families, as well as dealing with the uncertainty of what will happen next. And that kind of multivalent truth, one can be stymied by it, or one can recognize it in its greater mosaic and being able to deal with it. And it just ups the game of how to show up for people, I guess, is the bottom line of it all, as opposed to being a problem solver and say, to fix that problem, you have to do X. It's to recognize that things are true in many ways. And, to use what I'm beginning to understand as the quantum universe, that what happens here, how you pay attention to something here, even if you don't solve it, can absolutely shift things in other dimensions. And then I think that's really a very important and very valuable and humble understanding of what we actually can do, because we realize how powerful we are, even if we're overwhelmed most of the time.
Well, if you can think about your prayer and the healing of the woman you were with, which really shifted you and made you commit to, in your life, this path of being a rabbi. Energy healing is being discovered over and over again as we progress in science as being very real. You know, the telepathy tape season 2. Have you listened to that yet? That's great. And you know, the energy healing episode on that one, I can't remember what episode that is for the telepathy tapes, but it was a really, really good one. And we know that through quantum physics that we are, you know, light and energy, and that we're mostly empty space. We're like 99.129s of empty space because we're made of atoms, and atoms are almost all empty space. This is also almost all empty space. So one of the things that I'm really excited about in this time that we're alive, you know, for the next 10 to 15 years, this really becomes the penultimate moment for, are we as humanity going to choose abundance for everyone on the planet, realizing the divinity within us all, the love that we should have for all of us, and the technological progression, this exponential of exponentials, to create that abundance and choose that. You know, we have the free will to ultimately choose that, or cling on to the zero-sum, you know, power-based games that will destroy us if we cling on to those with technology this powerful. I'm 95% certain that we make it to the other side of this and have, you know, the equivalent of heaven on earth. But one of the things I'm so excited about is that we're going to discover more and more about our reality. And the patriarchs of the field, you know, of the quantum physics field, like Max Planck, became much more spiritual as a result. You know, they were studying things like Vedanta. That's where they were getting some of their knowledge about things like quantum entanglement. Now, they weren't referring it to that way. They weren't doing the direct bridge, but they were reading. And the ancient mystics knew how connected we all were. They didn't have the scientific language to describe it. And the episode that I did with Brian Rescue and the immortality key, part of the way he decodes part of the way that they got there were psychedelic catalysts used to help jumpstart the communion with the divine. And they later on were demonized because the church, it was primarily the Catholic Church. Like there's this part in the immortality key where Brian is in the Vatican, like studying these ancient scriptures that he's not supposed to have access to. It's very kind of Indiana Jones, the professor version. But the church wanted to control like people's opinion about reality. They didn't want people to have a direct communion. And so the indigenous wisdom was literally quite literally demonized, like all types of persecution,
Right.
To get people to not have that communion. But you know, the reality is that communion happens in many different ways. It happens through near-death experiences, happens through meditation. I had a woman on who originally is from Turkey, very good friend of mine. She just had a great exit for her company, Pariah Beam. She was on episode 31 right after John Mackey, and she had a spontaneous spiritual awakening. That's another path. Now, she didn't know she was going to have one, obviously.
Right.
But that was another path.
And I think that the opportunity that people have to open themselves up to something beyond themselves is both humbling, but also necessary as we chart this uninvestigated and difficult age. But I think we have more and more resources, as you know, as we begin to understand more about the science of quantum and other things, but also it hopefully, whether or not you're a theist or an atheist, gives you, I think, tremendous excitement to realize what is out there and how who we say we are can define us to a certain point, the costumes that we wear. But underneath all of those costumes is that hiddenness, that still small voice, or the, if you will, that space in between the atoms that allows us to actually connect. And that seems to be absurd, right? We're connecting empty spaces together. But the opportunity that we have to do that recognizes how we are all this one force, because all of us together can exist in unlimited space then.
Well, one thing that's so crazy to think about, but is just scientific fact as we understand it today. You and I each are 37 trillion cells around about there. Mm-hmm. And we have an equal number of organisms which live both in us and on us, mm-hmm. that form, the cohabitation that lets us walk in this world and be alive and be so full of that spark of life. I had this amazing dream recently just on how incredible that divine spark is, and that feeling of being alive, mm-hmm. no matter what type of creature you are with consciousness, whether you're a dog or, a person, the beauty of that spark, which is that part of God that's within us all, that we're all part of God's collective soul, and that we're embodied, that God is having a experience through us, mm-hmm. that we're all part of the one. And I was curious, because I was like, all right, well, let me just assume the materialist view and say, okay, well, how much of that, because obviously we have our memories from the time we were born, mm-hmm. and some people even have past life memories, but mm-hmm. but like we have our memories from the time we were born, and there's a durable sense of those memories in this collective that forms us, that's like 80, let's just call it 80 trillion things. Mm-hmm. And every day we have around 30 trillion of those dying and being reborn, whether they're cells or organisms. And I'm kind of mixing the math there, but every day, like, we're constantly having this rebirth, there's this principle in Buddhism, which I love, which is every day when you wake up from your dream at night, you can choose to be reborn and take what you want with you for that day, and shed everything in the past that didn't serve you. And so literally every day when you wake up, it's your fresh opportunity to be a new version of you, versus the consistency bias of like, well, I've acted that way in the past, so like I've got to bring that in.
Sure.
Which that consistency bias is our ego that's developed that because we're dealing with scarcity and some types of really bad situations with, not getting eaten by the saber-toothed tiger or whatever else it was, or just surviving, that to act with consistency was a way to create an assurance,
sure,
of trust. But we can be reborn every day. But if you take the materialist paradigm, then that means there has to be something that is a transference process in this dynamic unfolding of who we are, of the memories and everything else that's getting somehow transferred for durability, literally all the time, happening all the time, versus the theory of non-local consciousness, which is consciousness is something fundamental in the universe that we receive.
Right.
Instead, and our brains are like antennas. And again, two things can be true at the same time. I was having this deep discussion with a friend at the house yesterday where, we don't know how much is kind of, I'll use a computer terminology here, server side or source, and how much is local storage or, our brain. We don't know. I mean, but we're going to get to decode that as we advance, with brain-computer interfaces, with quantum physics, with the invention of quantum computing. We know that quantum entanglement is real. Quantum computing doesn't work without it, so we already know that that's real.
Right. And, and whether it's a materialistic or non-local idea, that it's all coming from the same eternal source as well. The opportunity that we have is that our lives are just on loan,
right.
Whether we're stuff of the earth or stuff of the infinite. Mm-hmm. It's just we happen to be dancing in this one particular open space right now, and it will just be a blink of an eye, and we'll be on our way. But this opportunity that we have to glory in it all and not again have to choose, it's either non-local or it's material, I think is a very freeing concept. And we can be with wonder recognizing all of it. And I think You quoted a Buddhist teaching about choosing to be reborn. In the Jewish practice, waking up every day and saying thank you. The Modeh Ani or the Moda Ani prayer is the one that says, thank you for restoring my soul. And to translate it in a way, I have a choice now of what I get to do. That opportunity we have is something that should infuse us with tremendous excitement and the word gratitude, which conquers everything.
This is something that I really want to emphasize in terms of the unity and how much we have in common. That one of the things that I love, and I'm proudly Jewish. I love going to the synagogue. But one of the things that I love,
we have no dispensation. You're fine.
No. It's just true. And it's one of these things I love is that no matter which faith tradition you follow, one of the old faith traditions, whether it's Buddhism, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Judaism, whether it's Islam, it has this beautiful synchronicity, this pattern recognition across them all. And there's certain practices in all religions which become transcended. You're going to love the chapter of my book. Chapter 10 is on religion. And there's things we've transcended in Judaism. We don't burn animals at the altar anymore as a sacrifice to God. Christians don't go on crusades anymore to force convert people to Christianity. Hindus are mostly evolving from the caste system and realizing that wasn't something that should be done to kind of other people and be like, sorry, you're in this caste. That means you can't ever be promoted into, this type of line of work. You're kind of at the labor, caste. And, the Muslim religion is ultimately, I have faith, going to transcend radical jihadism, and that's this cancer that they have to grapple with. And, fortunately it's a very, very small part of that religion, but it's a very violent part of that religion. It led to October 7th.
Right.
So I love that, because to me, that actually provides more proof of spirituality than less, because it says that we as humans have come from so many different angles to come to the same, destination.
Sure. And we're still all works in progress.
And
one is not better than another.
Right.
And we all have our work to do, and ideally can do it in relationship that will make it better.
Well, I love you. I love your heart. And I really appreciate you doing this with me. And
well, thank you for being such a profound teacher for me and expanding my horizons in wonderful friendship over the many years.
Yeah.
So blessings to you and your family.
Right back at you. You're an important part of my life, and you've been there for all the biggest family moments, and there'll be many more.
To be continued.
Yeah. Well, thanks, brother.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to Love Conquers Fear. What an amazing episode. I absolutely love Rabbi Neil's heart and the way that he walks in the world, and all of the ways that he bridges, the illusion of divides. We can choose to have them be very real divides, or we can see them for what they are, the illusion of separation. Keep on sharing. I love all the messages I'm getting. It really means a lot to me. It's happening multiple times a day. People are having a real heart shift, and that's what Love Conquers Fear is all about. Collectively, we have the heart shift, and we're going to make it on the other side of this exponential curves to abundance for everybody on this planet. It can absolutely be achieved. We just have to believe in it. We have to manifest it. We have to see the divinity and love within us all and choose it. So thank you, and keep it coming.